I'm going to go ahead and start since we want to make the most of our time with our guest speaker. I want to welcome everyone and thank you for joining us. This webinar is part of the Jean Monnet Chair on Oversight, Accountability and Democracy in the EU, funded by the European Education and Culture Executive Agency, part of the European Union Commission, and it is also co-sponsored by the Center for European Studies at the University of Florida. Our guest today is Professor Anchrit Wille. She earned her PhD from the University of Amsterdam and is a professor in public administration in the Faculty of Governance and Global Affairs. And since 2021, she holds the special chair of transitions in the public sector at the University of Leiden. Her research focuses on the interface of public administration and political science. And in recent years, she has worked on 3 areas of primary research, which have led to a variety of publications. The first area of research focuses on diploma democracy, meritocracy, and education as a social and political dividing line. The second focuses on political bureaucratic relations in national and European governance. And the third focuses on public accountability and the growing role of experts and policy evaluation, in particular, the changing accountability landscape and the role of modern watchdogs, such as the Ombudsman and the Audit Office. She's published a book on the normalization of the European Commission with Oxford University Press, and recently co-authored on the topic of the EU's watchdogs, assessing the powers of the European Ombudsman and European Court of Auditors. She is here today to talk to us about the impact of Commission hearings on the ability of the European Parliament to use its accountability role. And before I hand the virtual floor over to Anchrit, I want to ask everyone to be sure to use the question function to pose questions, not the chat function. We will have a discussion period at the end of the presentation. I want to ask you to please pause after the presentation to fill out the very short survey as you leave Zoom at the end of the discussion. And also, as a reminder, this presentation is being recorded and will be available on the UF Jean Monnet Chair website shortly after we are done with this. And so with that, I am going to make myself invisible so as not to be a distraction and hand the comm over to Anchrit. Please welcome and go ahead.
Thank you, Amy, for your beautiful introduction, and thank you for inviting me to speak today, and thank you for being here online. My talk is based, I now first need to make my screen share. Yes. Okay. My talk is based on long-term research on how the European Parliament confirmation hearings have changed during that they first began in 1995. This line of work indeed grew out of the broader research project which I did for my book, The Normalization of the European Commission. And in that book, I showed how the Commission has fundamentally changed over the past decades, and that one of the key forces behind this transformation has been the evolution of the EU accountability landscape. In particular, the function and the role of the European Parliament. So that was actually the step for me to go to this research. Yeah. I will talk about this research to the European Parliament confirmation hearings. Some parts of this research are still in progress, so I'm especially interested in your questions, in your reflections or suggestions after the talk. So let me briefly outline how I will structure the talk. I will begin with the broader context of the hearings, give you some conceptual framework guiding my research, and then I look at how the hearings have evolved over time and how they shape accountability. So let me actually first start with a bit of context. The European Commission is often criticized for being an unelective executive, but in practice, it sits inside a system of scrutiny and control, especially by the European Parliament. And the confirmation hearings are a part of this system. They are the moment when the Parliament can publicly question commissioners and hold them individually to account before they take office. Over time, these hearings have grown into what is probably the biggest public job interview anywhere in Europe. Since 1995, they have been a formal step in appointing every commission. Every new commissioner, I must say. Okay, let me begin with a few snapshots from these hearings. Here you see 4 candidates who did not make it through the job interview. All 4 were rejected by the European Parliament and therefore never started the job as a commissioner. First, on the right side, you see Rocco Buttaglioni. Yeah, that's it, Italian name. He was the Italian nominee for Justice, Freedom and Security portfolio in 2004 in the Barroso I Commission. He was rejected after MEPs raised strong concerns about his conservative views, particularly on women and LGBTQ rights, and he never made it as a commissioner. Next to Rocco Buttaglioni, we see Rumania Geleva. She was the Bulgarian candidate in 2009 for the International Aid and Cooperation portfolio. Her hearing went badly. MEPs questioned the correctness of her financial declarations and doubted her competence for the role. So she never made it. And then we see third, Alenka Bratušek, the Slovenian nominee for the Energy Union portfolio in 2014 under the Juncker Commission. She was widely judged as unprepared and not sufficiently competent, and the Parliament refused to back her. And finally, on the right hand, we see Sylvie Goulard. She was the French candidate for the International Market and Industry portfolio in 2019. And in her case, the concern centered on integrity. There was a suspect on misuse of an EP assistant for domestic political work and paid consultancy of a foreign US think tank. And also the broad scope of the portfolio that was assigned to her was a problem according to the Parliament. So these 4 candidates, these 4 examples actually, show how seriously the Parliament can take its role and how confirmation hearings can have real political consequences. Let me start with the background of these hearings. These hearings have their origins in the early 1990s. They were introduced after the Maastricht Treaty, when the European Parliament gained the formal power to approve or reject the entire College of Commissioners. To make this new power meaningful, the Parliament looked for a model, and it borrowed one from the United States where confirmation hearings in the Congress are used for presidential appointments and judicial nominees. So the EP adapted this idea and transferred it to the European context, creating a public structured interview process for incoming commissioners. The very first hearing took place in 1995. That was for the Santer Commission. And since then, hearings have become a central part of the appointment process and an important moment of parliamentary scrutiny. Let me look at why this matters. Why do appointment hearings matter? There are 4 reasons. First, the hearings make the appointment of the commissioner more transparent. Instead of closed-door practices between governments, candidates can now be screened in public and have to explain who they are, and what they plan to do in the coming 5 years. Second, the hearings allow the Parliament and also the public to get to know the incoming members of the EU executive. Third, the hearings offer insight into the composition of the new Commission, the team, how portfolios are distributed, how responsibilities are organized, and how the political balance looks. And finally, the hearings mark, of course, the start of the 5-year working relationship between the Commission and the Parliament. It's the moment when expectations are set, political priorities are clarified, and the groundwork for cooperation or conflict is set. So these reasons for holding confirmation hearing have resulted in 7 rounds now for 7 commissions since Santerre in 1995. This gives you a quick visual overview of the full period. In almost 30 years, these hearings have really developed into a high-profile activity in EU politics. They attract broad media attention and they shape the incoming Commission. So it is striking that actually, despite their importance, we actually know relatively little about these hearings, how they work, how they change over time, and what impact they really have. And that's also why in my research, I wanted to understand how these hearings have evolved as an accountability tool over the past 3 decades. So the core question I try to address in my research is how have these EP confirmation hearings contributed to the accountability, the political accountability of the Commission over the past 30 years. And to answer it, before moving to the empirical analysis, I first briefly outline the conceptual framework I use. To understand these hearings, I draw on Mark Boven's well-known definition of accountability. According to this definition, accountability is a relationship between an actor and a forum. The actor provides information, the forum can ask questions, and in the end, the forum gives a judgment, sometimes with positive or sometimes with negative consequences. If we apply this to the EU confirmation hearings, the fit is actually very clear. Yeah. The actor is the incoming commissioner candidate. The forum is the European Parliament. The candidate first provides written information, then it appears before the committee where members can question them, and afterwards the committee issues a formal evaluation and judgment. So in that sense, the hearings are almost a textbook example of Boven's definition. The written questions, the structured Q&A, the committee assessment all mirror this accountability relationship in practice. These hearings are also a form of ex-ante accountability. Hearings and confirmation of executive appointment are a way to strengthen the legitimacy or the accountability of leaders who are not directly elected. This is most common in presidential systems like the US, but we see similar kind of procedures also in parliamentary systems such as the UK, where parliaments scrutinize the appointment of high-level officials. Basically, these hearings function as an ex-ante screening tool. They help prevent problems before someone enters office. They reduce the risk of adverse selection, as economists would say, the danger of appointing people whose weaknesses or intentions are not yet visible but can be troublesome. So hearings help parliaments to manage two things. First, they allow screening, identifying candidates who may be unqualified or controversial or simply a bad fit. And second, they create incentive compatibility. That's a difficult word for a Dutch-speaking person. Compatibility. Yeah, here we are. So they create incentive compatibility. Yes, this means that before the executive starts their job, legislator can push them to clarify priorities, urge them to commit to certain directions, or try to set limits on what they will do. So confirmation hearings as an ex-ante accountability tool give information on who is being appointed, what I call personal accountability, and what policy direction the candidates intend to take. That's policy accountability. And of course, this is the information the parliament needs to make an informed judgment before they vote, with the option, of course, to reject or replace candidates if there is a serious concern. So, to understand these hearings in the institutional context of the EU, since the late 1990s, there are the debates about democracy, legitimacy in the EU have been intensified. As the EU gained more powers, people became more concerned about how the executive is held accountable. And in response, the EU built a much denser set of accountability mechanisms. And the Parliament is one of these accountability mechanisms, has the power to apply these accountability mechanisms. Two long-term trends are important for understanding this development of the appointment hearings. The European Parliament has gained substantial powers, legislative, budgetary, and also over the appointment of the Commission. So even before these powers were fully formalized, the EP pushed to influence informally to get more of this stronger say over the approval of the Commission. So there is research of the Catherine Murray, of Adrienne Héritier, who shows that these confirmation hearings became one of the tools through which the European Parliament empowered itself. And this is the process of parliamentarization. At the same time, and this development is not always linked to the hearings, not only the Parliament changed, also the Commission has changed. And as I've shown in my study, the normalization of the European Commission, the Commission became larger, the Commission itself has become more presidential, and it became more politicized. These two developments, parliamentarization on the one hand and presidentialization of the European Commission, directly have shaped these confirmation hearings. So in the research, I use actually a model which I have put on this slide, and it contained all the elements I just have discussed. We can see on the slide that it provides an overview of how different elements are connected. We see the institutional context, the parliamentarization and the presidentialization that shape the hearings, the appointment hearings, which are consisting of 3 stages of accountability. Each stage corresponds with a distinct development in oversight and accountability. And finally, the model allows to see the impact of these evolved hearings. By following the flow from institutional developments through the stages of accountability, we can understand the broader consequences and outcomes of these hearings. To get data and to collect the research, I used a combination of historical and primary sources. I examined historical documents and media accounts. And for the hearings, I have analyzed the documentation which is provided, like written questions, transcripts, and evaluation letters. And I did a content analysis of the question posed during the oral hearings. The data gives me the opportunity to study all rounds of hearings since Prodi starting in 1999, and this makes a more longitudinal perspective possible. Let's move to the empirical results, and I take a small sip of water. The empirical findings start with actually the timeline in which we see some developments in the institutional context in the EU. This slide shows how two trends have been materialized in organization and in law. First, on the left side, we see parliamentarization. We see successive treaty reforms, Maastricht, Amsterdam, Nice, Lisbon, and they all made that the European Parliament gained substantial legislative appointment and oversight powers. We see also that there is not only on the Commission, but also on the Commission President, a change in empowerment of the European Parliament. And we see in 2014 the Spitzenkandidat, which intended to link the choice of the President of the Commission to the outcome of the European Parliament elections. On the right-hand side, we see more internal and organizational changes within the Commission. The Commission has become increasingly presidential over time. Prodi and Barroso, as presidents, strengthened the internal organization through the Secretary General, and under Juncker, vice presidents and cross-cutting portfolios, policy families were introduced, and von der Leyen further deepened this presidentialization by further refining this system of clustered portfolios. Together, these two trends show that hearings are shaped by this broader institutional context in which they take place. This becomes clearly visible as we look at how the European Parliament has organized and run these hearings. Here we are. That's on the start of the hearings begins, of course, with the organization. Each candidate from the commission, from the planned commission, has to appear before a committee that matches its portfolio. Those committees prepare the session with the candidates, and the committee is based, the setup, that they share a similar kind of specialization, and that there is a close link between how portfolios are organized inside the Commission. But inside the Commission itself, things have changed due to the presidentialization. There has a stronger hierarchy. There are cross-cutting portfolios, and there is now a system in which there are powerful executive vice presidents. As we can see, there are 6 of those executive vice presidents who lead the cluster of portfolios, the broad policy families that stress across several DGs and that stress across several committees. So all of this, as a consequence for the confirmation hearing, is that the Parliament is still organized by committees, but the Commission is increasingly organized by clusters. So the two systems don't always line up neatly anymore. That's a recent problem as a result of this presidentialization. In the past, things were actually rather simple. One candidate commissioner linked to one parliament committee. But nowadays we see that this is increasingly linked to different committees. Take, for instance, the Dutch commissioner. He's also on the slide here, Wopke Hoekstra. He has the portfolio climate, net zero, and clean growth. Well, we're not talking about the titles of this portfolio, but it cuts across 3 committees. And he's not an exception. If you see, these are only a selection of commissioners, and on the right-hand side, we see the vice president. But many portfolios of these commissioners span 2, 3, or even 4 committees. So that's a change which has consequences for organizing these hearings. And another element is that there is a clear hierarchy inside the commission. Today's commission has this 6 vice presidents, 5 executive vice presidents, and their titles are very difficult, and a vice representative. But these vice presidents lead broad policy clusters that cut across the different sectors. So the parliament needs to mirror that complexity during the hearings. And this has major consequences for organizing this hearing, as we see, because most hearings now, or most committees in the parliament, need to work together to organize these hearings. In 2024, as we can see in the bar in the middle, half of all hearings, 26 hearings, but half of all hearings were co-organized by 2 or even 3 committees. And this is a clear trend compared to 2014, 2019, and it means that negotiation between committee chairs, more coordination behind the scenes, and more administrative work to get everyone aligned is needed to organize these appointment hearings. Of course, more committees means also more expertise around the table, and that scrutiny that better, of course, reflects how the Commission already works today across sectors, not in silos. But the downside is clear. Organizing these hearings has become more complicated and more resource intensive. So we see, in short, parliamentarization and presidentialization evolve together. The Parliament's reach expands, but the Commission's internal organization makes meaningful scrutiny much harder to manage. Okay, let's go to the first stage of the hearings. This is a quiet stage. Yeah, for this, I need to go further. I will move to the different stages in the hearing. The first stage is the provision of information, the politics of informing. It's a quiet stage before any public hearing takes place, but it has become absolutely crucial. It provides the basic evidence that the Parliament needs to judge 2 things: who is being appointed, the integrity, the independence, the competences, and what are they likely to do, their policy plans and priorities. If we look back at 1990s, 1995, the information provided to the MEPs was minimal. CV, a short note on the portfolio, that was basically it. But over the years, however, this stage has grown into a very elaborate screening process. We see one big driver was, of course, presidentialization of the Commission. As the president became more powerful and more political, the whole appointment process became more coordinated. Before the hearing started, the president-elect now had to submit political guidelines, the portfolio titles, and the nominees receive an individual mission letter. So this gives the Parliament information in a much earlier and clearer sense of the political direction of the next Commission. For Parliament, this has strengthened the policy accountability because MEPs can test nominees against a concrete policy agenda. A second development in this first stage is the expansion of transparency rules. Since 2004, nominees have had to submit a declaration of financial interest. Over time, this became stricter and more detailed since 2019. The Legal Affairs Committee formally vets this conflict of interest, and since 2024, this even covers non-financial conflicts. So here we see a strengthening of personal accountability, identifying risks early and preventing problematic appointments. A third element is the written questionnaire introduced in 1999 after the fall of the Santerre Commission. It was meant to provide a systematic first insight into the services and the views of the nominee. At first, these questions were rather long and chaotic, more than 60 questions per candidate, depending on the committees. There was a lot of variation in between the committees. In 2004, the European Parliament tried to standardize these written questionnaires. In 2009, they tried again to simplify them again. But now, today, we see that because the portfolios are so cross-cutting, multiple committees submit questions and some nominees still receive 50 to 70 sub-questions, written sub-questions. So instead of clarity and simplicity, they get overloaded by a lot of written questions. And that leads to another problem, that most of these written answers are not written by the nominee themselves. They are drafted by commission officials. So this reduces the value of this stage as an accountability tool. It looks thorough on paper, but it doesn't always get insight into the nominee's views and values or independence. So what we see in this stage is it has grown bigger, more formal, but also more bureaucratic and less personal. It produces a lot of material, but not always the kind of political information that MEPs really need. So this has direct consequence. It shifts the real accountability burden to the oral stage. So let's go and move to stage 2. This is the stage in which there is an oral hearing itself. And we see from the analysis what I have, the content analysis I've organized, a very clear shift compared to what was asked 25 years ago. When we look at the nearly 170 hearings since 1999, the pattern is more policy-oriented questions, and that dominate this second stage. The findings, I must say, are still preliminary because the stage is currently being recoded, but the trend is unmistakable. MEPs increasingly use the hearings not just to check whether someone is competent, but mainly to shape the Commission agenda. They ask nominees to clarify their priorities, to commit to timelines, to explain implementation strategies, and to spell out how they will translate the political guidelines of the Commission into concrete action. So this dominance of policy questions makes that other type of questions have become less prominent. we see that questions about institutional relations, which were very important after the Santerre crisis, has become limited. Also, questions about integrity and conflict of interest are largely dealt with in the pre-hearing stage, in the first stage. Personal background or competence questions have declined. Nominees today often have EU experience or a ministerial background. And with more heavyweight candidates, MEPs have less need to probe the basic abilities and more reason to push them on their concrete policy choices. And also because of the intensification of the pre-hearing stage, we see that weak nominees are caught earlier, so fewer competence questions remain for the oral hearing. That frees up space for substantive policy questioning. So stage 2 has become increasingly policy-driven. If we go to stage 3, the politics of evaluation, this is the stage in which everything comes together. The committee moves from asking questions to judging the candidates. Each committee, for each candidate, there is a written assessment prepared by committees, and the different assessments are coordinated by the Conference of Presidents. That's the bureaucracy. But when we look at the individual scrutiny, we see in the past 30 years, we see a clear trend. Yeah. When we look at the individual commissioners, one thing stands out. This is an individual assessment. Negative ratings are rare. From all candidates, we see that only 23 candidates were assessed as controversial or as problematic. So this is actually not a lot when you compare to all the 170 candidates which have been assessed by after these hearings. But only in 7 of these, and only in 7 of these cases, the candidate actually has been replaced or rejected or withdrawn. So that's a small proportion of all the hearings that have been organized. Most of these negative assessments are about the problems are about integrity, competence, or a weak grasp of the portfolio. Political objections do occur, but they are an exception. The classic example is Rocco Buttiglione in 2004, as we have seen at the beginning of this talk, where the concerns were not about competences, more about his political views. So we see that controversial, problematic, or unacceptable candidates are flagged, but the nuclear option, the withdrawal or the rejection, is not always there. There are also different outcomes of these negative evaluation. Sometimes commissioners, candidates are asked to give answers to additional written questions. Some undergo a second hearing, and sometimes it's asked to the president if it's possible to rearrange the portfolio. So only a few candidates are effectively rejected in this system. But what this shows is that the individual scrutiny has become an important tool for the parliament to signal, well, what its expectations are, what the parliamentaries want about new candidates of the commission. It signals something about transparency, about the policy priorities, about the personal integrity, even if most candidates are eventually approved, the process itself has become a real test. After the individual evaluation or assessment, then there is the stage of the collective approval. The collective approval means that the scrutinizing of the individual commissioners changes to evaluating the commission as a whole. In practice, this collective approval gives the European Parliament real leverage. Critical committee letters or a threat on a negative vote often leads to withdrawal or a replacement or a change in a portfolio. And that's the leverage of the European Parliament coming with the vote. But we see that this also is not limited to individual candidates. It's also related to the distribution of the portfolio or the composition of the team in its as a whole. We know that gender has been an issue for years. The European Parliament has pushed for more women in the Commission. Under Prodi, we saw the first real encouragement, but it wasn't until von der Leyen that the college finally reached a full gender parity. It shows how Parliament's scrutiny can influence not just on competences or individual candidates, but also the composition of the Commission. That's important, of course. Over time, this approval stage has become more openly political. Prodi sailed through this vote with 87% approval. Von der Leyen in 2024, her college passed with the narrowest margin of 54%. It tells us something about the shifting relationship between Parliament and the Commission, and those plenary votes seem to indicate also a changing political Parliament. Okay, let's go to the main question. What does this all mean for accountability? On the positive side, strengthened personal accountability and strengthened policy accountability. On the positive side, the hearing really do strengthen this accountability. The improvement for personal accountability is that it's now much better, the Parliament, equipped to spot problems early on, whether it's integrity issues, conflicts of interest, or simply a lack of competence. And importantly, the European Parliament also show it can block candidates or push government to replace these candidates. Second, when it comes to policy accountability strength, we see that MEPs increasingly use the hearings to pin nominees on concrete commitments or specific commitments. And during the mandates, they come back to these commitments in committee meetings, in resolutions, and sometimes in formal reviews. So the hearings have become an important point of leverage in shaping what the Commission actually does. Okay, that is positive, but there are also limits and constraints on accountability. It's not a perfect accountability tool. We see that there are real constraints. One is already mentioned, the bureaucratization of the written stage. We see also that the organization of the hearing are increasingly fragmented across the multiple committees, and oversight has become more divided and sometimes diluted due to this cross-cutting portfolios within the Commission and the lack of matching committees in the European Parliament. And not in this research, but we see that also party politics, member state interests are available, are present, and this shapes, of course, negotiations behind the scenes, and sometimes this can also interfere with the formal scrutiny. So even though the hearings empower the Parliament, they also reveal the tensions and political trade-offs inside the EU's accountability system. Let me wrap up. Over 30 years, the confirmation hearings have shifted from a loose exchange to a strong accountability tool of the European Parliament. Looking at the hearings stage by stage here, we can see that this tool has deepened how it contributes to accountability. Each stage of the process, information, questioning, evaluation, has grown more structured, more demanding, richer, and more consequential. Across these different rounds of hearings, we see across these 7 different hearings round we have seen since 1995, we see 2 big trends, developments. First, the empowerment of the European Parliament. It has gained influence, and this parliamentarization of the system makes that the European Parliament has been quietly strengthening democratic checks over the EU executive. At the same time, we see that the Commission has become more presidential, which influenced the hearings because of a shift in leadership, a shift in hierarchy in the Commission, and the strategic policy design in the Commission. More broadly, it's clear that accountability in the EU is not a simple one-directional control mechanism. It's an evolving interinstitutional relationship in a broader accountability landscape. It's negotiated and it's increasingly also contested. Beyond their concrete effects on personal and policy accountability, the hearings also play an important symbolic role. They gave both the Commission and the Parliament a stage to present their ambitions and political identities. And perhaps most importantly, they strengthened the Commission's legitimacy by exposing nominees to public scrutiny and linking their authority to a form of democratic approval. Thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to your questions.